the original work of Su Qing's autobiographical novel 10 Years of Marriage Chapter 3. The romantic widow got sick the day after the wedding. I have a cold, a stuffy nose, and a heavy head. But a heavy beaded crown must be added to the heavy head, because the bride's attire must be removed after 3 days, when the guests can disperse. So I got dressed up, served tea in front of my parents-in-law and elder relatives early in the morning, ate some snacks, and then sat in my new house with my head bowed for everyone to appreciate and joke about. Changshan was the groom, and as usual he was not allowed to stay in the room for long, otherwise he would be laughed at. Even his parents would be unhappy if they found out. The new house was dark and crowded with people, men and women, old and young, all rushing up and surrounding me in the center. I sat alone with an itchy nose and just wanted to sneeze. I wanted to sneeze, but I was a little embarrassed, so I used a handkerchief to hold my nostrils hard, and I almost cried with tears in my eyes. I wiped away my tears and looked around secretly, feeling very sad. Changshan, caused me to catch a cold, but he slipped away without knowing where he was. Why are you afraid of being laughed at? Shouldn't the groom see the sick bride? Almost everyone who saw it gathered round here, except for the parents-in-law, who of course refused to enter the new wife's room easily. And she, the young woman in silver clothes, had never been seen. She must be fooling around with Changshan outside. I don't know why I suddenly thought of this, and it felt like a thorn in my heart. No, she is a widow, so she has to avoid it, she explained to herself, pulling out the thorn in her heart. But at night, the thorn finally penetrated my chest and could no longer be pulled out. The thing is like this. I just came back from saying good night to my parents-in-law. I held my heavy head in my hands, dragged my tired legs, and approached the door step by step. Suddenly I heard a mixture of male and female jokes inside, and one person said, "Looking at how you treat us, you were with your bride last night. And somehow, don't talk nonsense," was Xian's reply. I really had nothing to do with her last night. My good sister-in-law, yeah, Ruixian's sweet voice came up again. Do you have anything to do with her and do this shit to me? Look, I'm so tired today that I even have some dark circles under my eyes, and my nose is red. It's all from you. She was so crazy that she got a cold. Then she laughed coquettishly. I almost fainted, my legs felt weak and my head felt even heavier. I thought to myself, what a shameless man and woman, using me as material for conversation and fun in the middle of the night. Thinking of this, I suddenly heard another woman's voice speaking. Thank God. It doesn't matter if there is a third party, right? So I listened to what the third party said. She said, brother, you have to take care of yourself and stay away from her. Colds are easily contagious. With a groan, I pushed the door open and stood in front of this girl with a crooked neck. Xian came closer, looked at me sheepishly, and said softly, "Are you here? We are waiting for you," I sneered. And after a while, I turned my face up to his face and shouted loudly, "Please avoid the sun quickly and be careful of catching a cold." Anyway, at this point, my voice trembled. I got up and couldn't talk anymore. But my temper was that I would not be happy until I finished speaking. So I lowered my head and tried my best to hold back my tears. After a long while, I finally said, "I have nothing to do with you." Xian's face turned red. He glanced at Ruixian helplessly, and then begged his sister, "Xingying, go to bed early. See you tomorrow." Ruixian's face turned pale immediately. He stood up straight and dragged the girl with the crooked neck. As he walked out, he sneered, "The groom has given an order to expel guests. Hurry up and leave." As he said that, he pulled the door hard and made a loud noise. Got up, with the sound of the door closing. I fell heavily on the bed, my forehead burning. But on the third day, I forced myself to put on the heavy beaded crown and entered the kitchen in full view of everyone. Everything was ready-made in the kitchen. The bridesmaid told me that as long as I went over to lift the lid of the pot and stirred the burning soup a few times with a spatula, the ceremony in the kitchen would be complete. I thought this would be easy, so I lifted the lid of the pot with my right hand and picked up the spatula with my left hand to stir. I heard a ha-ha in the distance, and Ruixian's sharp voice said, "Look at the bride. What a foreign style, holding the spatula in your left hand." Then, everyone started shouting and whispering, and some stretched their necks to look at me. I was holding the spatula in my left hand, and felt that it was wrong to put it down, and it was wrong not to put it down. I glanced back helplessly, intending to ask the bridesmaid to help me out. Unexpectedly, Toom turned around and caught a glimpse of Ruixian's face facing him in the distance, with a sneer hanging from the tip of his pale chin and a red diamond-like mouth. So I got angry. So I simply held the spatula tightly with my left hand, stirred it in the pot a few times, and then threw the spatula straight into the center of the pot with a plop. The boiling soup splashed up and splashed on everyone's clothes. There was a commotion. The children screamed, the women murmured, and everyone left one after another. I stood upright in front of the stove. My forehead felt hot, and my ears were buzzing, but I also heard Ruixian's voice seeming to sneer at the door. What a grumpy bride, Uncle Xian. You have to be careful when serving her. Xian's service skills are indeed good. When I fell ill in bed, he always carefully sat on the edge of the bed to take care of me. After 3 dynasties, the guests all dispersed. Because I was ill in my room, I couldn't see them off one by one. Xian said, "You will rest quietly. There are no guests here anymore." I was secretly happy. There are no guests. Of course there is no Ruixianlu. Xian stayed with me and talked about the situation at Shanghai University if nothing happened. At that time, he was studying at Shanghai University, not far from his grandmother's home. When you go to grandma's house, you often meet Ruixian. I opened my eyes wide and asked eagerly. He nodded, looked at me, and shook his head. Gradually, I also learned the simple history of Ruixian. Her maiden name was Bai. She married into the Lu family and became the eldest daughter-in-law of Xian's grandmother. In less than 2 years, her husband died of an illness. So on our wedding day, Grandma didn't allow her to enter the room. Xian said and explained to me. I nodded, no one said anything, and after a while of silence, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I saw Wang Ma sitting on the edge of the bed, but Xian was not in the room. I wanted to ask her again, but I was embarrassed, so I had to hold back. Later, when he did it more often, I felt surprised, so I pretended to be asleep to see what happened to him. When he saw that I was asleep, he called out Qing Mai softly a few times. I didn't answer, so he quietly slipped out of the door. After a while, Wang Ma walked in quietly. I closed my eyes and listened. The room was very big and everything was quiet. Suddenly, in the study room opposite, there seemed to be a man and a woman singing together in a low voice. The woman's voice sounded like Ruixian, and the man's voice was of course Changshan. They sang The Merry Widow. I opened my eyes and asked suddenly, "Mother Wang, has Miss Lu's wife not gone back?" Wang Ma said, "Yes. She and the old lady are still here, because it will be the birthday of the wife here in half a month, and they will have to wait until this day before going back." "Maybe." Wang Ma smiled and looked at me. "Look, your young mistress will be fine by then, and the young master will also live with them to go back to Shanghai to study. I may be dead by then. Mother Wang, you go and rest. I don't need you to serve me here." After I finished speaking, I closed my eyes. After Mother Wang went out, my heart became even more empty, filled with love and hate, jealousy and anger. All disappeared. I just quietly listened to them singing The Merry Widow. From then on, my illness got better day by day, but I still pretended and refused to get up. Every time Xian sat on the edge of the bed, I always said to him, "Go out and play. You are tired enough." He smiled and shook his head, saying that he was willing to accompany me, but there was always a sneer on his face. I didn't care about him. I just closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. At night, I refused to sleep with him, saying I was afraid of infecting him with germs. He didn't force himself, and every time he slept on his feet, he was always quiet and didn't even move. He doesn't need me, I thought to myself, looking at the light green tin ceiling. It turns out there is only one Ruixian in his heart. I felt as if I was in the middle of the boundless sea, drifting with no destination. Maybe they will get along well before we get married. Did she actually possess my husband? Or did I snatch her lover in name? But love is dedication, never taking or grabbing. I want to go back to Nanjing. I want to go back to Shanghai University. So I decided to wait for my mother-in-law's birthday before leaving. My mother-in-law's birthday was on November 3rd. That morning, I got out of bed very early and dressed up. I was wearing a purple-red thin woolen cheongsam, purple-red woolen high-heeled shoes, and a small purple-red woolen bow on top of my long permed hair, so I applied a thin layer of lip balm on it. After lying in bed for many days, my skin became fairer. I just put on some rouge lipstick. Am I beautiful? Of course not, but I am always young. Holding tea in hand, I walked to my parents-in-law's room, where Ruoxian was already sitting there. Her face is too white, her lips are too red, and her eyebrows are too thick, too thin, and too long. I think she has no natural beauty, but I have to admit her artificial beauty. The narrow black silk cheongsam with a bright red lining is worn on her slender body. I really can't think of any bad words to criticize. If I have to criticize, I can only say that she is too beautiful. In the evening, a birthday banquet was held in the hall, and the whole family was sitting round. At the top was Mrs. Lu. My parents-in-law were sitting on both sides. Ruoxian's seat was next to my mother-in-law, and Xian and I were sitting down together, pouring wine. Xian seemed to be very happy while pouring wine for everyone. He urged me to drink too. He said, "Eat more. You have been sick since you got here and haven't eaten anything well yet." I secretly thought, well, after I leave for school tomorrow, I'm afraid I will never come back in this life. You guys will be my farewell party tonight. Thinking about it, I drank the wine one glass at a time. I don't know what the wine tastes like. I don't know how people are looking at me. I just felt that my eyes were very blurry, and my heart was very blurry. It seemed that my chest was beating, and it seemed that I was holding a fallen leaf floating in the sea. There were waves on the sea surface, surging, and suddenly it became turbulent. The sea wind roared, and I felt that the whole universe was shaking, and my whole body was in great pain. Slowly, the waves calmed down, and there was no sound around me. I felt that my body had been destroyed, leaving an empty heart with nowhere to put it. I couldn't help but shed tears, but someone wiped them away for me immediately. I was surprised and opened my eyes to take a closer look. It was Xian, sleeping with my head side by side on the same pillow. The next night, we boarded the ship. Besides Xian, there were 2 other people traveling with me, Mrs. Lu and Ruoxian, but they were all going to Shanghai, not Nanjing. On the 3rd night, Xian saw me off on the train. Ruoxian insisted on seeing me off with him, and I happily agreed. While the car was driving, the midnight wind blew people to their knees. Xian took my hand and whispered, "Take care of yourself." I nodded, but immediately took out my hand and pulled Ruoxian's hand with my fingertips, making sure that she could not touch my wedding ring. So I said to her, "Please forgive me, my good sister-in-law." The train started to move, and I leaned against the window alone, looking at where they were standing. In the middle of the night, under the weak light, they seemed to be standing still, leaving 2 long shadows lying side by side on the ground. Gradually, the car drove away, and the shadows were no longer visible. I quickly stretched out the hand I had shaken with them before, pulled the wedding ring off hard, and stuffed it into the bottom of the suitcase without noticing. It's late autumn. I breathed a sigh of relief and dozed off in the second-class car.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.